Welcome, everyone. My name is Isatta Sisay. I'm a joint head of community services at the Royal Trinity Hospice, where I've been working for the last 15 years as specialist palliative care nurse, as well as managing services across the organization. My background is oncology, as well as palliative and end-of-life care. And I do get myself involved quite a lot in my community, doing bits and bobs, promoting health and well-being, especially around end-of-life care. It's Dying Matters Week, which is a great opportunity for us to open up conversations about what it means to be in a good place to die, whether that is physically, emotionally, financially, or in any other way as it might seem to you. We believe that planning for the end of life can help people get on with living. So by the end of this virtual event, we hope you will take away practical tips from the panelists' experience in helping people prepare for the end of life, so that you as an individual can have that power and confidence to start that conversation with either your loved ones or whoever matters to you most. Just to highlight that with the audience, there is a Q&A function at the bottom, most likely, of your screen. If you want to drop in any questions during the conversation, please feel free to do that throughout the event. And I would keep an eye on that chat function, and then we could look at some of the questions later on. So welcome to our panelists as well. I'm going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. So if I start with you, Victoria.
Yeah, thank you. So my name's Victoria. I'm the Senior Funeral Director at Poppies. I've been with Poppies for 5 years. And my job involves meeting with families when somebody's died, and going through all the arrangements for a funeral, all the choices that they need to make, and then being there on the day for them, on the actual day of the funeral, making sure that the funeral happens the way that they want and need. And one of the sort of key beliefs that we have at Poppies is that there's so much choice there around what sort of funeral you can have. And so events like this are great for making people aware of that, and perhaps getting them talking about those choices with their families and their friends.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Victoria. Kish, over to you.
Thank you, Isatta. My name is Kish Modasia, and I was involved with arranging the funeral of a very dear elderly neighbor of ours who had no living relatives, and he was English, very much very strict English gentleman, and so we took care of him for a long time, and I was involved in having conversations with him around how he would like his funeral, and that was an important discussion that made, actually, when things happened and I got in touch with Poppies, to make the whole process much easier. And I will be explaining a bit more about that later.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Kish. And last but not the least, over to you, Marta.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marta. I'm the dementia palliative care and dementia nurse specialist in Royal Trinity Hospice. I work in a community team. I have been a nurse for 15 years, and I have 2 masters, and the researches are always around people with dementia and supporting them and their families in the community. I've been working in Trinity for 3 years now. We support people with palliative care needs at home, but and at their end of life, but as well to have these conversations around future care, and about what they want and their wish for their end of life in an everyday basis, obviously. So I'm very happy to be here to discuss this and give you some practical tips as well.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to all of you, Victoria, Kish, and Marta. As you can see, we're going to look at what Dying Matters means to us from different perspectives, and you as the audience as well would have the opportunity to make your comments in the chat, but also to ask questions via the Q&A. So I am going to direct my first question to Victoria and Marta, and in no particular order. Today we're talking about end of life planning what it means. Let's be a bit more specific. What sort of things does this cover is my first question to you, really. Victoria, do you want to start?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so for us, it means perhaps pre-arranging your funeral, and that can take many forms. So some people like to do that, make their wishes known very formally, perhaps through buying a funeral plan and making it very clear the choices that they would make for their funeral about a coffin and flowers and so on. And other people maybe do it less formally. So people will get in touch with us and say, actually, I just want you to keep, you know, a list of my wishes. So when the time comes, my family know exactly what I want to happen. So part of my job does involve going out to see those near the end of life or terminally ill to get an idea of the sort of thing that they would like to happen for their funeral.
Okay, thank you. And Marta?
So for us, best care planning, it's obviously not just one conversation, it's several conversations around what the person can expect in the future, what their needs might be at that point, and for them to be able to decide what is the care they want, what is the place they want to be cared, what is the place they want to die, who they want to be involved in those decisions and in their care, facilitating the way of sharing those conversations with the families and those decisions with the families and with other health care professionals, with using appropriate record, digital record of those decisions. It involves as well a bit more specific things like, if you have an infection at that point of the illness, would you like to go back to hospital? Would you like to stay at home? Would you like to go to a hospice and die in a hospice? Would you like to stay home? What is available in the community to support you during that time? So a lot of conversations around future care and what to let them know what they need and what they might need and what is available in the community as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Just going back to you, Victoria, you mentioned doing a lot of visits to terminally ill patients or end of life, people who are nearing end of life. Do you ever get the opportunity to have one-to-one conversations with people who just want to have that conversation without them being terminally ill or nearing end of life?
Yes, certainly. Some people like to make sure that they've got their wishes written down, even though they may not be terminally ill, particularly if they've got really specific wishes around what they'd like to happen at their funeral. So it's not, yes, it doesn't just have to be for people who are approaching end of life. Mm-hmm. It can be anybody. And, you know, it's good for people to start perhaps talking about this before they are necessarily at end of life, because at that point I think families can feel it's a really difficult conversation, and it may be easier when, you know, when the person isn't ill. So certainly I'd encourage people not necessarily to leave it until they're at end of life to have those conversations with their family.
Absolutely, and I agree. And to draw on that, as you've just highly noted, it isn't always easy to talk about. How might you start a conversation about end of life planning?
Yeah, so we really strongly encourage people to have these conversations about planning their funeral. It can be really difficult for families to have, you know, even those of us who sort of work in this profession can find these conversations difficult somehow. So I think for me, approaching it perhaps not head on. So, you know, perhaps a sort of gentle question. So the way that I started this conversation with my mum, for example, there was a song on the radio and I said to her, oh, I love this song. I think I'd really like to have it played at my funeral. You know, can you think of some music that you like? Because she's really keen on music. I was like, you know, what sort of thing do you think you would like? And, you know, she was quite happy to talk to me about that. And then later that led into, you know, a more general conversation about her funeral in general. And it turned out she had some really strong opinions about that. And so I was really glad that I'd managed to broach the subject in quite a gentle way. That for me was key.
Okay, thank you. And Kish, from your perspective, based, you know, following on from your experience so far, and it's kind of opened some doors for you, how would you start such a conversation?
So, as I said, you know, I ended up arranging the funeral of a dear neighbor of ours. And, you know, I'm from an Indian background, so from a Hindu culture where our way of arranging a funeral and mourning is very, very different. And so I knew Michael had said that whatever happened, we were to take care of everything for him. And I explained to Michael that, you know, I need to understand what you would really like, because because he was very English and very, you know, he didn't even like the smell of curry, let alone anything else. And he would, you know, sit in my kitchen and say, oh, what's that awful smell kind of thing, you know. So I said, you certainly don't want an Indian funeral. I know that for sure. So I made a little bit of a joke about it and said, so I'd really like to hear what you'd like and how you would like it. And so he thought about it, and I just planted that seed to start with, and I just left him with it. And then about a week later, he said, you know, you told me about the funeral, and I've been thinking about it. And he had everything written down. So he wrote down, you know, no religious service, a plain coffin, no flowers. He wrote down all 3 hymns that he wanted sung. So that, when it came to the time of him passing, made it very easy. He did end up being in a home, and I did end up getting in touch with Poppies, who actually I didn't know from anywhere. I had just seen their sign when I used to drive past there, and something came in my mind, and a poppy was Michael's favorite flower. Just okay.
Oh,
that's going to be a sign. So let me ring Poppies. And I ended up ringing them the day before he passed, not knowing he was going to pass the next day. And they were very supportive, but also in terms of dying matters, all of us need to get how we would like our funeral conducted down on paper. It makes it easier for those loved ones who are really struggling with the loss. It just makes it so much easier, you know, because otherwise people who are getting very emotional may want to choose an elaborate coffin, and that may not have been appropriate for that person. So it's really important to get those details in.
Okay, thank you, Kish. And Marta, from a professional point of view, it's kind of in a way our bread and butter. We do it over and over and over again. However, like Victoria highlighted, it is a difficult conversation to have and to start, and how to approach it. From a professional point of view, what are some of your ways of doing it in terms of starting such a conversation?
Well, I always try to know the person that I'm talking to better before I start with more complex questions, and always try to acknowledge what they are worried about. Strangely or not, most of the people that I visit are really open and really want to talk about those things, and they are concerned about those things, about end of life and future care. And sometimes it just needs for you to ask them, what are you concerned about? Are you concerned about anything? What if you get more unwell? Have you ever thought about that? And sometimes being a professional and being a bit outside of the closest person to the person that we're visiting, it makes it easier sometimes to just talk to us and say to us things that they wouldn't as easily say to their family. I think obviously advanced care planning and these discussions about end of life should be person-centered, but I think it's so important, as Victoria and Kish was saying, to involve the ones that the person loves and the family around them. And one of the things that I sometimes say to a person that it's not so keen on doing advanced care planning and discussions around their end of life is how much important this is for the people around them when the time comes, and how much of a stressful decision and period is when people have to make such hard decisions as do not resuscitate, or what to do if they need to be taken to hospital. And it's so much easier when the family knows, when the carers know what to do, when is everything written, and they feel, because if there isn't anything, if they never discuss this, what happens is there's a lot of feelings of guilt sometimes, and feeling that you don't really know if you're doing the right decision for that person, and that can have a big impact on the bereavement process of the family, and as well for all the experience of end of life. So if this is known, if the person's wishes are known, especially with dementia, we need to do this as early as we can, so that we allow the person to have those conversations and to decide for themselves and to feel that they have control, even when they are unable to decide later in the disease. And so it is very, very important, I think, to talk with the patient as soon as you can about this, but as well to kind of include all the loved ones that they wish to be involved in their decisions.
Okay, and I think you've already. Sorry, Victoria, did you want to say something? Yeah.
I was just going to echo actually what both Marta and Kish said, which is that I can see the sort of the fallout from these when decisions aren't taken. So we'll meet with the family. They're right in the midst of grief. They've just been bereaved, and suddenly they have to make all these choices and all these decisions about a funeral.
Yeah.
If those conversations haven't happened already, it just really adds to the burden of the grief. So yeah, I would just say it's so important to have these conversations, and as Kish said, to get something written down.
Yes, it is, and quite rightly so. And I think that was that kind of leads me into the other question that I really wanted to pose to both of you, Marta and Victoria. It's about the consequences of not having these conversations. What are some of these consequences? You've already touched on some of them, but can you expand a little bit about, someone not sharing their wishes, someone not being able to express to their loved ones, oh, by the way, when I die, I don't want this type of coffin, or by the way, when I die, I want to be buried next to my mother, and so on and so forth. Like Kish also highlighted, she is Hindu by religion, and her friend was not, and total different ethnicity, and she was expected to then coordinate and do this funeral. Had she not asked, what would have been the consequences in relation to that? Marta, what would you say?
So if the person doesn't live to her wishes, the consequences will be that someone else is going to do that decision for yourself. And sometimes, and it's funny you say that, because there is a research from Karen Aronson Benningen in 2016. They compared the differences between a person with dementia, their decisions and their wishes for future care, with what their loved ones and carers thought they would like for end of life. And there's very low to moderate agreement between both of them. And as I said, that will have an impact, obviously, on the families and on the patients as well, and their quality of life at that point. I think, as I said, the impact in bereavement process and coping with everything that is happening, it's very important. If you have those wishes written, I think when your loved ones follow them, it's almost a feeling of joy to be able to do that for them and to respect their wishes. So it can really help with the coping process. There is, I lost myself, but it's okay. I will remember what I was going to say.
That's okay, thank you. How about you, Victoria? What are some of the consequences? Maybe just sharing one or two.
Yes, I think, yes, as Marta says, it adds to the burden of grief for families when they don't know what the person would have wanted. And as you say, it could be as basic as, did the person want to be buried, or did they want to be cremated? So, you know, which is a huge decision. And if people don't even know that, it really adds to the burden of their grief. And equally, then it can cause tensions amongst a family. You know, if some people want one thing and other people want the other thing, and they can't come to some sort of agreement, again, that can add to the burden of grief that they're feeling.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is that obviously not having your wish written and known to your loved ones, what happens is, so you can undergo treatments that you don't really want to at that point, and you are unable to say that you don't want to. There is a very good video from Dying Matters. You can look it in YouTube. It's I Didn't Want That, and it's really good to reflect on. They have several different experiences about people not sharing their wishes and things happening not as they want, and it's a good way to reflect about that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. So far, we're doing fine, and the chat line is quite active, and we're getting a couple of questions in the Q&A that would go to later. I just wanted to go on, and this is to all of you, and maybe Kish, you might start first. How would you recommend a person with a terminal diagnosis talk about their wishes, either with a friend or with a family member? And especially somebody who is not really keen in engaging in talking about what happens when they're gone. I mean, my cultural background, we see a lot of this where culturally we don't feel comfortable talking about death and dying. And so how do you tackle such a situation? How do you approach it?
And you're right. I don't think it's just your, I think it's a general thing. I think dying has become such a taboo subject that it feels like it's not right to speak about it. And yet it's the ticket we're all holding, not knowing when we're going to board, basically. And so I think it's really important that not just people who are terminal, but all of us need to think about this. And before even the funeral, it's about things like powers of attorney. You know, we need to think about putting that in place for us. For Michael, that was really important. He had no living relatives. So even having the conversation with him about putting the powers of attorney in place was quite a tough conversation. And you know, we had to give him that time to think it through. It's a bit like I said earlier, you plant that seed, then you just leave it for a bit, then you get back to it. It may have grown a little bit, it may not. You just got to keep nurturing it in a way so that that conversation can get a little bit, I don't know about easier, but it just something opens eventually and you are able to have that conversation, because in a way that person is also thinking about it, but because nobody's talking about it, they don't talk about it.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a two-way thing. So
yes.
That's what I feel is really important.
Yes, it is. It's about guaranteeing your wishes, isn't it, are followed. And sometimes some people are open and direct in terms of such conversations. And sometimes some people need a bit of a nudging to say, oh, let's have this conversation like Victoria did with her mom.
Yes.
You know, a song was playing and she started the conversation, and it was done when it was nobody felt under pressure. It's not because mom is dying or Victoria is dying. It's just because of Victoria's experience and background as a funeral director. she felt we posed such questions when it's the right time. And so in terms of your experiences supporting patients or family that have made you realize the true value of planning ahead, what would you say your experience is, Marta?
I think the most important thing is to be clear and really honest in those conversations. As Kish was saying, it's not one conversation, it's just planting that seed and going along with it. First of all, it's always acknowledging what the person knows and what they want to know about the illness progression and what to expect in the future. So it don't need to be one conversation. It can be several different conversations. I sometimes even leave leaflets and resources for them to have a look, to discuss in family all together, and then come back to me or to the GP or one of the professionals that were able to record their wishes. It can take one day, it can take a year to go through these decisions, and it's just a question of patience and honesty, I think. I think if you have a trouble with tackling these conversations with someone that it's not really keen on talking about, go slow, but be honest with them why you want to know this, and why is it important for you to know their wishes, or in your case, why is it important for you to say those wishes to your family. There are some cards called Think Advanced Care Planning cards. It's a bit playful with a very serious subject, but in a way can help families try to discuss those questions between themselves and know what to ask and kind of initiate those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And Victoria, what is there any experience that you could share wherein supporting either one of your clients or family member that actually made you realize the true value of planning ahead?
Yeah, most definitely. So we had somebody come to see us to register his wishes for his funeral with us. He was terminally ill. And, you know, outwardly he was, you know, a fairly conventional man. And I think his family assumed that he would have a conventional, sort of perhaps quite traditional looking funeral. But he was very, very specific about what he wanted. And he wanted a leopard print hearse. He wanted a bamboo coffin. He was very specific about what he wanted to happen at the crematorium. So he was a massive Chelsea fan and he wanted the Chelsea flag up in the crematorium. And he'd been born and bred in Tooting. So he lived in Tooting all of his life. And he had a really specific route. So he really wanted to get his money's worth out of the leopard print hearse. So he had this very specific route that went around lots of places that had meaning for him in Tooting.
Yes.
And it was great to be able to write all that down and sort of see the relief on his face that he knew that all of this was going to happen. And I think his family also were of the view, this is great, because we would have never guessed at any of this. So for him, there was relief in knowing that that was going to happen. And for his family, there was relief that he had the funeral that he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good. And were you present at the funeral? Did you direct the funeral?
Yes.
And what would you say was the ambience in terms of, yes, it was probably a heavily emotional day for the family, but what would you say was the ambience based on the fact that he'd made all these plans and they were going through all these routes and, you know, in the leopard print, you know, hearse, and just coming to the crematorium and seeing this massive Chelsea flag, which probably then reminded the family about, you know, the good fun memories of watching games together and so on and so forth. What was the ambience?
Yeah, so it was clearly it was a very emotional day for them, but I think that the sense of relief that they had that they were doing what he wanted and taking this route around to places that were of meaning to him and sort of bringing those back to them, knowing that things that had huge meaning for him were there in the crematorium, that made a big difference to them. So although it was obviously a hugely emotional day, I think, you know, there was a real sense of pride that they'd been able to achieve that for him.
Absolutely, thank you. And this is a final question before we then go on into the Q&A box, where we've got so far, I think, a couple of questions in there. Kish, I'm going to directly focus on you with this question. Is there anything you would have wished you'd known before you planned your friend's funeral and supported him at the end of his life that would have made it any easier for you? And do you have any advice for anyone else? I know you've kind of dropped lots of advice during your responses, but are you able to focus a bit more on this?
I think the one thing would have been, if he had a choice of a funeral director or so on. And I think that was where I just feel Poppies were exceptional, because, as I said to you, the name Poppies came into my head because it was his favorite flower. I happened to ring them the day before, not knowing he was going to pass, and they helped me along the journey in a way that I'd never in my life arranged a funeral before. Not even an Indian funeral, let alone any funeral. So, you know, the fact that they were really supportive and helped me through the whole process, I think. So your choice of funeral director is important. And I would say to anybody that follow your gut. Your gut your gut and your heart will tell you if you're with the right people or not. But really, if Michael had not left us the specific instructions, I would have been completely confused. I mean, even gave me the courage to step up and say, actually, I'll conduct this funeral service, which is what I did in the end, you know, and because I know that he would have just loved something like, and I wore a sari there because he used to always love me wearing saris. So we did make it very much an event of celebration, as Victoria was talking about, with all the kind of music. And of course, he had the last joke because he made us all sing 3 hymns during the funeral, you know, like he was a real patriot. So we had to sing Jerusalem, I vow to thee, my country, and, you know, thine be the glory. So we say he had the last laugh, but no, it's really, really important to make your wishes known, as everybody said. I love the example of the gentleman who was a Chelsea fan and made sure he was taken through all the love. Because imagine for people, for the person who's passed, it's so lovely. But for the people who are really there, they're like, oh my gosh, they're struggling so much. And when they see this kind of celebration happening, it's, I don't know, it's an amazing, amazing feeling.
Okay, yes, it is. It is an amazing feeling. And it just moves that burden, like we've talked about, and a lot of people have, you know, talked about. And even within the chat, the comments are kind of quite, you know, in relation to what we're talking about and resonate with what we are talking about. So I'm going to go into the chat. There's a couple of questions there. And this one is for myself and Marta. What would you suggest for someone in a situation when the person is unwell and dying, wants to talk about their plans, but their families just can't bring themselves to? Marta, do you want to go first and then I'll comment?
Well, I think that's when we can help as professionals, not just us, but obviously other health professionals that are close to or that are able to visit and talk with the person about end of life. And what I feel is that sometimes with my patients, I can be like a link between them and the families when they share their wishes with me and they want to share them with their loved ones. I try to do a meeting with everyone together, and so that we can share and discuss within ourselves their wishes. So it's having someone else outside of the family can make a kind of help the person have the courage to talk with the family about this. And you can even talk specifics and make things more clear around those decisions.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, it's about rightly being that link. It's about also trying to explore why are the family finding it difficult to have that conversation. What might be their own underlying issues, their own underlying fears, their own underlying anxiety? Because as healthcare professionals, especially around palliative and end-of-life care, it's a holistic care we provide. So when we go into a patient's home, it's not just about the patient. Yes, it's patient-centered. However, that includes their loved ones and family and friends, whoever it is that makes a difference in that person's life and is of some meaning to that person. So we do try and see as best as possible where we could explore what are some of the reasons, be it the challenges, the fears, the anxieties, and try and put that individual or family members at ease. And we try and guide them so that they try and understand that it is about the patient, not about themselves, but at the same time, acknowledging their own feelings and concerns as well. So most times that's how we approach such challenges really, or questions or situations where people, there's kind of a little bit of tension where, because sometimes you go into a home and then the patient is quite upfront. I want to do A, B, and C. And then the family, no, you're not there yet. You can't do it. And it's our responsibility and our duty as healthcare professionals to bridge that gap. So somebody said, Polly said, in your experiences, how does having a planned end of life for someone impact the family's experience of bereavement? I think I will start off with this question and answer it. I think it actually reduces the burden of grief. It actually answers a lot of questions that doesn't need to be a question after the person has died. I think it was highlighted earlier on, it's about making those very, very important and pertinent decisions that you may not have the right answer to. And so it creates a lot of burden, it creates a lot of pressure on individuals or family members. And of course, it creates sometimes a lot of conflict amongst families as well. And I think, Victoria, you kind of mentioned something within this line. Is this something you want to add on to as well? Some of the impact you see where people have not been able to plan end of life.
Yeah, it can certainly have an impact on people, and where they're at the very start of the bereavement and the grieving process. Very often, people who are grieving find it difficult to focus, for example. And if you're asking them to make lots of decisions that they haven't thought about, sometimes it can be overwhelming for people. So yeah, that's why it's really important to have at least some discussion around these things. And clearly, if they're overwhelmed while they're trying to plan the funeral, they may not experience the funeral that they need. A funeral can be a really transformative event for some people, particularly if it's a celebration of life. And if that doesn't happen because they haven't had the conversations, it can impact their grief sort of later down the line.
Okay, thank you for that, Victoria. And another person has asked, where there are cultural and traditional requests and loved one left behind disagree with the individual, what advice would you offer on how to navigate the conversation? Marta.
We'll try always to have in consideration the cultural surrounding of the person and of their family, obviously. But I think, as Isatta, as you saying before, I think we need to focus on the patient and what he wants or wishes more than anything else. But I think there's always a ways of going around the conflict. And one of the main things is starting by understand that culture and what to expect and how you can go around that and make people feel that you know what they are culturally thinking about death and what they are their values and principles. And if you start to show that respect and go around that, then I think it's much more easier than to be able to talk with them about end of life.
Yeah, and I think that brings us back to you, Victoria. You know, where you say you go to people's home from a funeral director point of view. They have a conversation because they've already started thinking about it. Hence your presence. And you've put everything in place as per their request. Have you ever had an experience where after the person has died, you have family members where, whether it's cultural challenges, traditional challenges, or just family dispute, where they then come to you and say, no, we don't want it the way, for example, our father wanted it. We now want it this way. How do you manage such situations?
We do. I mean, I must say it's not common. It does happen sometimes that what the family wants doesn't chime with what the person who has died has told us. But I think, as Marta said earlier, it's about exploring why is that? You know, what are the issues that the family have? And sometimes by talking about those and exploring them, they change their minds. They think, okay, actually, yeah, let's do it the way that the person who died would have wanted it. I think one thing that we find, so we offer a service called Simple Cremation. So it's basically looking after the person who's died, but then taking them to the crematorium and there being no ceremony. And that'll be something that they've perhaps specifically asked for because they don't want there to be a ceremony. And sometimes that can be really hard for families to understand. And they may sometimes decide, actually, they do want a ceremony. So again, it's about exploring, you know, what are the issues that they have around there not being a ceremony, for example.
Okay, thank you for that. And the next question, I think, again, this goes to you, Victoria. What is the minimum age for a person to arrange a funeral? And can a child, for instance, guide a service with the support of an adult?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. In order to arrange a cremation, there are forms that have to be completed, which get sent to the crematorium. And you have to be a minimum of 16 years old to complete and sign those forms. So anybody 16 or over can do that. So, you know, relatively young, somebody can do that. Anybody who's younger than that, they would need the assistance of a family member in order to complete those forms. But if they were the sort of the closest person to the person who's died, then obviously we would absolutely listen to them and what they wanted for the funeral. Even if they couldn't actually sort of legally sign the paperwork themselves, we would still absolutely listen to their wishes as to what they would want.
Okay, and then be it their legal guardian or whosoever is the adult can then support them in terms of signing the paperwork, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, and then this one, I think it's kind of in between whether it's a statement or a question, but it's more to do with who is the funeral for? The person who has died or the people still living? I think from my perspective, sometimes it's a bit of both. But again, that is all based on planning. And again, it's based on the individual who has died or who is dying. And hence, if you plan in advance, it kind of gives you the opportunity to not just think about what you want, but also think about what would be useful for your loved ones around. Like Kish said, her friend, part of his planning was making sure that they sang songs And I think some of it is because he loved those songs as a patriot, but also he knew that it would be fun for them to sing those songs. So I think it's a bit of both, really. But I think you only have an opportunity for it to be a bit of both if you plan in advance. But most times when it's after you've died and you've not really left anything or any tips or cues or hints in place, it's really based on how that individual sees you and what you meant to them, and their own also beliefs and what they're governed by, whether it's ethically or morally. That is what guides them to then organize your funeral for you. I'm just gonna go on now. I think there's no more questions in the Q&A, and I think we'll just go on now in summing up for the panelists to just give us a quick summary of what they've talked about so far. And then I would finalize, and then we should hopefully come to a close. So can I start with you, Kish, in terms of what you see today as?
Yes, I think what's really important is what we've discussed is all of us should have a plan of some sort. It's really important. Having a plan in place means that our wishes and what we want is carried out. It means there's less for the family to worry about, or, as Victoria said, they're in such an emotional state, they may not be able to make the right decisions. It just makes it much easier for them. Mm-hmm. And actually what it gives everybody, family and friends, like I said, Michael had no living relatives, but the crematorium was completely packed out, and it gives everybody the chance to say their goodbyes and have that closure in a lovely way, whether it's a simple way or even a bit more elaborate. That closure is really important for everybody as they're going forward, and more so when you've got all of your family around you.
Okay, thank you, Kish. Before I move on to you, Marta, somebody has asked a quick question in the Q&A, and I'm going to respond to that quickly. The person says, how do us as end-of-life care workers support ourselves? Now, from our organization's point of view, we do focus a lot on well-being, staff well-being. We provide a lot of one-to-one support, as well as external support, such as clinical supervision, such as counseling, such as safe space and areas to just reflect. And also we use a lot of debriefing, because sometimes we do come across and experience quite complex and challenging situations that as a team of professionals, we would share our ideas, we'll share our experiences, and that helps us a lot of peer support and so on. Victoria, do you want to touch on that? Because from your services point of view, how do you manage this?
Yeah, I mean, we have similar issues at work. We love our jobs, but they are hard. It is hard sometimes, the work that we do, and it's really important, the mental well-being of all the team. So we have informal debriefs. We have an employee assistance program where there's more help at the end of the phone, for example, supervision, looking out for each other. Particularly after difficult situations. Some funerals are more difficult than others. So just, we have similar sort of processes in place that you do.
Okay, thank you. And what would be your final remarks?
So I think, very briefly, it's okay to feel scared talking about death and dying. It's not unusual to feel frightened or embarrassed and shy away from those subjects. But I would absolutely encourage everybody who's here tonight and everybody that you talk to go and do it in one form or another, and just acknowledge it can be hard, but it is really, really important, and it can make a huge difference, as Kish has talked about tonight.
And Marta?
Well, I add my words to Victoria's words. I think it's what I would like to come out of this session is for you to think, everyone to think about what their wishes would be for end of life, and to know that there are a lot of support out there. There are charities like Compassion in Dying, or the Pathway Through Dementia with legal and financial support. There's a lot of charities, there's a lot of documentation, information online. Go ahead. It doesn't need to be now. It can be through time. Just read, think, reflect, and give yourself time to do those decisions and to think about those.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, there's been lots of links and information posted on the main chat line for people to go on and do some further research. There will also be further resources that will be shared, including the recording of the event today, because I think one or two people was asking about that. So that will be shared with you. And we would also encourage people to follow both Royal Trinity Hospice and Poppies on social media handles. They're on Twitter, they're on LinkedIn, they're on Facebook, they're literally everywhere. And also, just to mention before I close, there is going to be a short poll for you all to participate in, just for us to measure the impact of what today's event has provided for you. And some questions will appear on the screen as it has now. If you could just give yourself a few moments just to answer them, that will be great. But I want to now take this opportunity to thank all of you, our participants who've given the time this evening to join us to have such conversation. But most importantly, I want to thank Poppies as well for agreeing to do this as joint work. It's always a pleasure working together and hosting such events. Matters of life and death are very important, and dying matters a lot. And the reason why dying matters a lot is because death is inevitable. Like Kish said, we all have the ticket. We're just waiting for when our number is called. And when it is, we don't really have a choice about it. However, like Marta said, as a dementia palliative care and specialist nurse, it is about having some control over how you experience dying, but also it's about having some control about what happens when you die, what you would like, what you would enjoy, and what you would like your family or loved ones or friends or neighbors to do on your behalf. And it takes us also to experiences of a funeral director, especially Poppies, and Victoria saying it's about the difference you see on family members' face, the ambience, the atmosphere, the way they approach planning that funeral when everything is in place compared to when nothing is in place. That huge burden of grief that is going on, the emotional burden, and the fact that they now have to think, and make very, very, very serious and important decisions, and the impact that has on them. So it's very important for us to look at this and think about ourselves, but most importantly, our loved ones. It's about having these advanced care planning discussions. And from some cultural and traditional perspectives, especially from my background, talking about death and dying doesn't mean you're going to die. It's about preparing, and it's about getting on with living, because once you do it, you're then able to get on with living. We hear a lot of our patients, in my experience, they say, I just want to sort this out, and then I can put it away, and then I can carry on doing what I want to do. I'll go through my bucket list. I'll then travel to wherever I want to travel and do whatever I want to do. I know I've organized my funeral. It's about also choosing the right timing to have that conversation. And Kish also said, planting the seed, planting that seed, and then sometimes walking away and giving it few moments or days or hours or time, and then revisiting it and see what you could get best out of it. Looking for that right opportunity to start that conversation. Marta said, it is about not thinking it has to be done in one conversation. You could plant the seed, go away, come back, have the conversation. It might take days, hours, weeks, and sometimes even months based on what's going on. Looking at that right time and opportunity, like Victoria did as well. And all of this, it's all about making sure that you have control over what's been done when you die, but also it's about reducing that burden on your family and loved ones. And that includes your carers, your friends, your neighbors, whosoever means something to you. And also reducing the impact it might have on them when you are gone, in terms of when you die, when they're grieving, when they're going through the bereavement process, how that impacts on them is very, very important. So today is kind of a tip of the iceberg, but we hope today has given you practical ideas and tips about how to have these conversations, how to begin them, how to approach them, and what are some of the things you should be thinking about, and where to go look for further information. So once again, I want to thank you all. I want to thank our panelists, Victoria, Kish, and Marta, and myself for hosting this evening. We want to thank again Poppies and Royal Trinity Hospice for giving us this opportunity and platform to do so. We hope you all have a lovely evening, and please follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, anywhere you can, so that we could continue with the conversation, because dying does matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.